As I am speaking, there is a silent shift happening in technology that I feel like is not being properly discussed. Everyone is busy with AI and XR, including myself, but while keeping up with all this new stuff, I couldn't help but notice how an additional trend is developing across the whole industry. I'm talking about personalization, not to be confused with customization, which usually means the same thing, but I'm using a personalized definition, where customization, specialization, and adaptation are parts of personalization. So what do I mean by all of this, and why does it matter? Well, let's start by the first trend, customization. If you have been following the industry at all, even by paying like half attention, I think you will have noticed how Apple, Google, and some of the others have been embracing customization a lot more recently. To be fair, Google with Android has always been much more open. People would make all sorts of ugly atrocities with the worst icon packs you can imagine. But even they have started making all of this more official, let's say. Google's recent customization push happened with Android 12, when they introduced Material You. The whole concept behind Material You was making the entire OS customizable. You can choose a palette, or generate it from your wallpaper, and the whole system, meaning the icons, the widgets, all the various components, pretty much everything adapts to that palette, inside and outside of that. Some people don't like it much, but I am not some people. I think it's really cool. And despite how much it spreads to everything, it still retains a strong identity you can recognize. Google, as I said, is not the only one doing this. As we've seen over the last few versions of iOS, Apple has been experimenting with customization too. Unlike Google, they didn't present this as one huge coordinated effort. They are doing it gradually. They started by making the lock screen more customizable. They then brought some of those ideas to the contact cards, and now with iOS 18 they are introducing tinted icons and widgets. This last change has been pretty controversial, but that's not really the point here. What matters here is that for some reason, roughly at the same time, the two biggest mobile operating systems both decided they wanted to support customization much more. And no guys, they didn't simply copy each other. Stuff like this for huge companies like Apple and Google takes years and years of planning. If I had to guess why this is happening, it probably has to do with the maturation of smartphones really. The same thing I already said 3000 times. There just isn't much else left to add at this point, and people have gotten used to them for the most part. For a company like Apple or Google, the risk of adding complexity in this way has only gotten smaller. The pros, now, taking all into consideration, outweigh the cons. The second trend is specialization. If customization had more to do with the details of the OS, specialization has an impact on the apps, on the market as a whole. I can't speak for what is happening on the Android side here, but at least when it comes to the Apple ecosystem, making apps is becoming progressively easier. Apple has an incentive to have more developers for the various platforms they own. That should be obvious to everyone, but unless you're a developer, you probably don't know what they are doing in practice to achieve this goal. I'll make this quick. The major proprietary frameworks needed to develop for iOS, iPadOS and so on are being systematically replaced by better versions. UIKit is being replaced by SwiftUI, Core Data by Swift Data. The common goal for these new frameworks is to make them much simpler to write and understand. The obvious consequence is that they are becoming more approachable by more people. It's becoming generally easier to start. When you have more developers, you have more competition, and so, besides apps generally improving because of it, new ideas, or at least variations on pre-existing ideas, should become way more common. If you are the millionth developer trying to make another version of a very common idea, the logical strategy for success is finding your niche, to focus not on making an okay product for a broad audience, because those already exist, but rather the perfect app for a very specific group of people. Groups of people can mean anything. You can make a tool that is more optimized for a specific profession than the generic version, or that embraces a specific aesthetic, as long as you have something that is unique to your product. This is what I mean with specialization. When it becomes easier to develop for a platform, for every need you have, you are more likely to find a tool that fits your preferences better. And in case you don't find it, it's easier than it has ever been to just make it yourself. And it should keep getting easier. Do you want an example of what this looks like in practice? Well then, this is the story of how and why I made an app. The app in question is called Donic, and I created it following that same template. It's a variation on a common idea, with the design I wanted and a feature that was crafted with its precise demographic in mind. me. Donic is a countdown app that allows you to write your thoughts related to the thing you're waiting for, and I designed it using all the various elements of my design philosophy I showed in my projects over the years. I wanted it to look consistent with iOS, which, besides a few creative liberties, yeah, it checks out. I wanted it to be completely usable with just one hand, which I achieved by strategically placing all the interactive components in the bottom half of the screen, and I wanted a metaphor that would tie everything together. The big idea behind Donic is that I wanted a countdown app that gives more importance to what happens while you wait. Sometimes the act of waiting for a thing can be as memorable as the thing itself. If your interests line up with the stuff I'm interested in, even barely, I think you'll understand what I mean. Gaming and tech, for example, a significant part of following this stuff is just waiting. So much stuff gets leaked months, sometimes years in advance, and you only have vague rumors from unreliable leakers or, if you're lucky, a teaser. And thus, naturally, if you follow all the updates, you will change opinion a bunch of times, from confusion to disappointment to excitement. It happens all the time. I wanted a way to keep track of this part of the experience, making it almost a tangible thing, because it deserves to be. The word tangible, alongside time and personal, were what I used to come up with the right metaphor. A pocket watch. I approached the creation of this app how one would approach making art, basically. I didn't make user research and I didn't try to appeal to a broad public, because you can find thousands of apps that do that already. I made it exactly how I wanted it to be. But as it turns out, by working in this way, you ensure that there's at least one fully satisfied user. And so, since people are more similar to each other than what they think, plenty of other people like this thing as well. With app development becoming easier, we are going to see increasingly more people building their ideas for these platforms, creating more variety for everyone. Anyway, even if at the beginning of the video I mentioned AI and XR as fully separate topics, that's not entirely correct. Personalization, as a trend, is not completely independent from AI or XR, but they too aren't completely independent from each other. Everything relies on everything else. When it comes to XR or spatial computing, it's a whole thing. Too big to discuss here. I'll make a video just about that. But AI, well, I think it's much more obvious. Look, we all know what is an AI assistant. We've all seen how helpful they can be for someone learning how to code, which I guess has an impact on what I called specialization. But that's not at all, not remotely the only impact they can have. It's time for the third trend: adaptation. One of the big promises of AI is that by accessing your personal context, it should be able to figure out very complex requests with different names, filters, and a bunch of other things, to retrieve data kinda from wherever. If on top of that you have a way to present that data in a structured manner, if your AI understands the rules of design, you might not need apps anymore. This is not purely hypothetical, by the way. We have seen examples of what has been called generative UI, like Vercel's V0, but that's really a tool for developers. What I'm envisioning here is an AI model that runs locally and that can generate an entire UI, containing the data you asked it to retrieve on the spot. Imagine the potential of something like that. Take for example even something basic like the Notes app. How does it look like when it's influenced by each of these three trends? Customization enables you to change stuff like the app icon, the palette, maybe the fonts, surface level aesthetic details. Specialization enables you to find a novel reinterpretation of how a Notes app should be, redesigned from the ground up, with exotic UX imagined for specialized use cases. Adaptation, instead, enables you to make the UI on the spot. You'd be able to achieve everything I just said, but with a level of flexibility that is impossible to achieve with hard-coded design. You'd be able to have a UI that changes per single node. Something very basic for a shopping list, something wildly complex for a detailed project outline you're working on, with different components only showing up if, when, and where they need to be. If somehow the system can also understand the reasons behind your changes, if it can extract your taste, it may even be able to do this whole process automatically. And so you end up with an OS that truly adapts to the user, down to things like how navigation between views should be handled or how basic controls should work. To end this video, I want to make something clear that might not be obvious. All of this is not on a linear path. Personalization is a trend that's showing up more and more across the whole industry, but not in any easily predictable way, if that makes sense. It's more of a vibe shift, something that is becoming more desirable to people. even on platforms where technically none of this stuff was being prevented from happening. There is a level of enthusiasm in a bunch of different areas that wouldn't have made sense 10 years ago. People seem to be more willing to ditch the boring, safe, stock versions of things than they were in the past. They want to explore new ideas, new aesthetics, new form factors. It remains to be seen what will happen when our devices and how we use them change in the future, and that's one of the things I tackle in this video. Check it out if you want. Ciao!